Oh, is it good to be back with you? Weekly webinar. James Hoffman, Dr. Mike Israetel. How we doing?
Trying to do the surprise gerbil.
Ah!
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, I like that one. That's a good one.
Good, man. How are you?
I'm good. I found like the greatest toy that I've ever encountered. Unfortunately, the dogs like don't give two fucks about it, but I think it's like the greatest thing ever. Ready? I'm going to do a slow intro. Keep your ears tuned.
That's incredible. It's a piggy. The dogs don't like it?
I think it's too big for their mouths, but it's hilarious. It makes like a perfect pig sound.
Well, they will grow into it at some point soon.
So now I like attack them. They'll be like trying to relax, and I'll be like, pig! And they'll be like, ah!
Your dogs already hate you.
Yeah. They're already like, get the fuck out of here, man. What are you doing?
They're like all included documentary. Like they interview the dogs. Like, well, what's it like to live with Dr. Hoffman? They're like, yeah, I mean, he's fine. One of the dogs is like, the other one's like, okay, yeah, okay. Like he get a little annoying. He get annoying.
No good until pig comes out.
We hate the pig.
I can't get enough of the pig. It cracks me up.
All right, pig. Shall we begin?
Yes. I'll screen share here. Ready to go.
Boom. So our first victim, who actually has two questions that made it into the webinar this week because they got upvoted so well.
Nicely done.
Yeah, I figure if people want to hear stuff, they get to hear stuff. Charles Austin.
Got it.
Says, can you guys discuss the August 10th publication of RE, Mesocycle Progression and Hypertrophy by Eric Helms and the team? For the viewers that don't know, the publication argues, amongst other things, that progressing up to MRV may be suboptimal and a misapplication of overload.
Is that the one that was in response to your guys' article? Yes, okay. Yeah. I didn't read it. I honestly, full disclosure, I didn't read it. I kind of glanced at it. I didn't read the whole thing, so.
I read it a bunch.
Keep that in mind.
So I'll just share a couple of quick views. So if you want extended views, you just go on the Renaissance Periodization site, and one of the most recent blog posts from a couple of months ago, it's just a little bit of scrolling, is a response to not just that article, but a response to a number of videos and other discussions that Eric, his colleagues, and a number of other folks not associated have sort of critiques they have leveled against the going from MEV to MRV idea and adding sets. And that is, James co-authored that with myself and Jared Feather, and I believe Ansh. And that was very extensive. So it'll give you everything as far as picking apart those points. You know,
just for some timeline context, right? So you, Jared, and somebody else wrote something that got published in the NSCA's,
Tiago.
Right? And that got published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning, one of those.
Ago.
And then they wrote a response piece critiquing some of the points. Yeah. And then Mike, myself, Jared, and Ansh, I think, made just kind of like a bulleted like response to their response. Just
yeah,
so
and it wasn't just
context.
To them, it was to a bunch of other similar critiques. I figured we would all in one the shit. It actually came out or significantly earlier than their piece did, because they were, you know, a couple of those folks were already doing podcasts and stuff like that. Felt it was right to say something. So you can look into that more extensively. Just a couple of really quick points. The ones you bring up, amongst other things, that progressing up to MRV may be suboptimal. Progressing up to MRV may be suboptimal, but the cutoff of when to stop any earlier would be to some extent arbitrary and could be presented with a few really nasty questions that are difficult to answer in the framework in which I understand that they've presented. For example, why aren't you continuing to train more? Why are you stopping here? If you don't go all the way up to MRV, you choose to stop and deload at any other point before, someone could say, why are you deloading now if you're still making performance gains and you're still responding well to training? Seemingly, why are you deloading? And it's a very difficult question to answer. So James and I aren't saying that MRV is something you have to go to. There are some compelling reasons why maybe stopping short of it is a good idea, but they're not so compelling that they cancel out the other skeptical reasons of why not keep going. So I think the balance of the logic is that if you go to MRV and no further, you're sort of cutting the middle road there. Going beyond MRV has some serious questions about it, but stopping much short of MRV, and the real big question is how much shorter and why is that a non-arbitrary place to stop is a real thing. And then the misapplication of overload. How do I say this politely? Maybe there was a misapplication of overload in the way that we wrote the article. I can guarantee you, James and I, and certainly Carl Junot and Tiago and Jared and myself, who wrote the original article, do not misunderstand overload. Highly, highly prepared to engage on incredibly technical grounds if necessary about what overload means. And I think that was maybe it's an interesting critique, but I think that other critiques of theirs are much more solid ground.
Yeah, and that one's kind of a silly one because, as most of you, well, it's silly in the idea that I think their critique was kind of looking at overload in a very narrow scope. But what we know is overload is very contextual, right? It's contextual to what you are doing, and in this case, the intensity is something that is a box checker. Like as long as you're kind of within this absolute load and this relative load, you're good, right? And that's a very broad range. And then the big modulating variable in hypertrophy, as we've been saying for years at this point, seems to be volume. Everything kind of seems to be pointing at that, so long as frequency and intensity are in otherwise appropriate ranges. So in that case, like the main overload stimulus is really going to be coming from the volume. And you can't just go from very low stimulus to maximal stimulus, and that's why we have that progression built in. Do you necessarily have to progress? No, but we think it's a pretty good idea for a variety of reasons that we've outlined many, many times.
And more specifically, James, sorry to cut you off real quick. Yeah. It's the reasons to not progress that have to be questions at least as much as reasons to progress.
Yeah, so there's just as many.
Don't progress is kind of like, oh, okay, so why? So TLDR, our position can be summarized as this. If you were doing X number of sets per session for whatever number of weeks, you're no longer getting very good pumps. You're getting essentially almost no soreness. Your performance within the session is not indicating a lot of fatigue. Do you suspect that you're maybe not training hard enough? And if you think you are training hard enough, how do you know that? You're clearly not challenging the physiology in any way that is detectable subjectively in any sense. So if you are comfortable training with very little pump, with very little soreness, if none at all, and with no detectable intra-session fatigue buildup to the target muscle, and you're comfortable telling yourself that X number of sets that you've chosen is still a good number to promote the optimum amount of hypertrophy, you're comfortable training without any of those things occurring, I tip my hat to you and wish you best. James and I are personally not comfortable guaranteeing optimum hypertrophy when the signs of disruption and sort of homeostatic disruption and pushing close to limits are just not really there nearly as much as they were. So we would, at that point, decide there's an elevation stimulus required.
Yeah, and I'll just make two more points so we don't belabor the topic too much. But like a really classic example, and I think I've said this on a different webinar, is like just take 2 weeks of vacation from lifting, right? And just take 2 weeks off. And then when you come back, try to do what you did in that overreaching week before you went on vacation. See what happens, right? You will find that that is a pretty good, at least it's anecdote, but it's pretty solid to show that it's probably not in your best interest to pursue the same crushing volumes that you were doing after taking some time off. And there might be a progression that's warranted in some of these instances at the very least, but it makes sense. And the second point I was going to make, which I remember, there are very specific instances where we would recommend against training up to MRV. And here's a really easy one to understand, I think, for most people. And you're going to roll your eyes because you know it's coming from me. When you have people who do sports, it's probably not in your best interest if you have a sporting athlete who's maybe team sports and they are doing body composition alteration to actually train any given body part to MRV. Maybe stopping a little bit short and just going up to an MAV is probably a better idea. Well, why is that? Because it's just sapping too many of their training resources that is going to take away from the other things that they're doing, their fitness, their skills and tactics in other areas. So that's a perfect example of like when you say, okay, I got a soccer player, should I be training their quads up to MRV throughout the next 3 mesocycles? I'd be like, no, that's a bad idea. You're not going to be able to run. You're not going to be able to, do any of your soccer stuff. And there's just an easy way where we would say this is, again, there's a individualization. There's some context where we say like, yeah, sometimes it's a good idea if you're just doing physique training. If you're doing other things, like, yeah, of course you wouldn't do that. It doesn't make sense.
Next up, just one comment down is Airy Small.
Airy. He's been on a roll with some good questions, eh?
So he says, hi, Ducks. What is the optimal approach to take when you can't train a large area of your body due to injury? Using a lower body debilitating injury as an example, should you keep the mesocycle similar to usual training and just remove any lower body exercises, or should you increase frequency and volume of upper body training due to reduced systemic fatigue from not training the lower body? So it's actually a very simple answer to this question. The big thing to watch out for is assuming that systemic fatigue is always and everywhere keeping your upper body from progressing to higher volumes and faster jumps in load and so on and so forth. And then it turns out that some of those muscles were already at their local limit, and then doing more just fucks them up completely. So I would say begin at the usual volumes that you would, MEVs, same frequency of upper body, and start to auto-regulate. And you will see if your systemic fatigue has opened up any avenues for you. And all of a sudden, at the end of that meso, you'll be like, wow, I managed to do way more volume, get way more progress, and train way more consistent weeks without a deload, however way you structure it, than I would if I was training legs. This is great. But because you use it in an auto-regulatory fashion, you're not top-down imposing, like, this will for sure be better, because you have no idea. It might be like training chest twice a week with your scheme was still the best idea. Maybe you only got 2 more sets out of it per week, but maybe your systemic fatigue was really holding your chest back, not local, and you could double your volume and get a ton more growth. Once you do one meso like that, and you've really sort of felt out the landscape, and you get into a place where you're like, dude, I'm so full of energy and my muscles are so locally not taxed that I'm like doing 15 sets per session here with chest twice a week. I'm going to go to 3 times a week because I can smash that much more volume. Definitely systemic fatigue is not a factor. Maybe I wouldn't be able to survive it before. But now that I don't have any legs, they've been cut off per this example, then I can do way more chest. And then you can start expanding your frequency. So I would say probably hold your frequency the same, auto-regulate to see how much real room you have, that's more room, and then rearrange the frequency based on if you need to accommodate a higher frequency because you're extended beyond 10 sets per session and your systemic fatigue is not budging.
That was a really good answer. I'm going to come at it from a different angle. So when you say debilitating leg injury, so like to Mike and I, that means like a railroad tie like blew off and impaled you in the leg and you literally can't move, right? What most people mean by that is they have like a quad pull or a groin pull or maybe a torn hamstring, and those are all legitimate injuries. But me personally, I wouldn't consider those to be debilitating because they can be worked around. So before you go really just giving up and abandoning the legs, I'm pretty confident you can find something to do. Now, granted, it might not be the hardest thing, and you can basically, like, for example, if you can't squat, you can't deadlift, you can't 45-degree back raise, you can't do any of that stuff, maybe you can do a knee extension. Maybe you can do like a single leg glute bridge, and maybe that's just the best you got, but you can probably find something. And if you do that, can you basically just take what Dr. Mike said anyway to your upper body and do all those steps? Probably, because it's pretty minimally fatiguing. But I think people are quick to jump the gun and say, I can't train upper body or lower body or whatever.
Or they hurt their quad and they're like, I'm training no lower body. It's like you still have glutes,
yes.
You still have hamstrings, you still have calves.
You still have plenty of things that you could do. And if you get creative, you can find little workarounds. And the thing with hypertrophy training is it's much more forgiving than like strength training or sport training. As long as you are meeting some basic criteria of absolute and relative intensities and putting in some reasonable volumes, you can get something out of it. It might not be the best growth stimulus you've ever had, but you can probably at least hit like an MEV for some muscle groups, which is perfect. So don't be quick to abandon just because you have an injury. Again, when Mike and I hear debilitating, that means like you're on crutches or you can't walk, you're in a wheelchair or something like that, right? More often than not, it's like, okay, you got a pretty good groin pull, you got a pretty good, maybe your SI joint's flaring up and you can't do some other things, but maybe you can do something and start there and then use the steps that Dr. Mike outlined for adjusting your upper body training.
Excellent. Charles Austin, again, right below Harry Small.
Damn. Got it.
3 questions.
Oh, we snuck a couple in this one.
It's really all just
Slick
kind
bastard.
of a question. Number 1, or actually preface, can you guys talk about programming out of town? Here are a few scenarios.
So just a quick blurb. Sorry to interrupt you, Mike. I actually wrote this great article. I think it's great because I wrote it, of course. I called it Travel Like a Sports Scientist, where I wrote this huge thing about like, here's like things that we've learned from all of our travels around the world about how to do traveling well, and it included diet advice, training advice, a bunch of miscellaneous stuff. And then this COVID thing happened, and I had to just fucking sit on that article for indefinitely at this point. And I was so mad. I was like, damn it, I wrote a good one, and no one's going to give a shit. Now I got to update it with like masks and shit. God damn it.
Yeah, or just wait until like the vaccine comes and then you're good to go.
Yeah. Didn't they? I'm not really watching the news much, but I heard through the grapevine that there was Russia was claiming to have some kind of vaccine. Did you hear anything about that?
Yeah, they do, and they've been using it. So we'll see if it works.
Oh, cool. Putin for the win.
Look, we have vaccine, yes.
It's called death.
Yeah. If you have COVID, we give you vaccine in the back of car. All right. Can you guys talk about programming out of town here? A few scenarios. Number one, no access to any gym or any equipment. Do you just do your best to eat at maintenance calories and then pick up where you left off and get back? So we're going to be answering this in the context of like an intermediate to advanced, pretty serious physique/strength person. Because like if you're just a beginner and you're working out, like you can just do some push-ups and some, bodyweight lunges and you're good to go. Generally, I would say yes, eat at maintenance calories and pick up where you left off, unless you're going away for an inordinate amount of time. I think that's a real good idea. James, agreed?
Yeah, and I mean, like, something is better than nothing. Even if you just did like 3 sets of push-ups to failure, is it the best? No. Is it at least like hitting maybe an MV? Like, yeah, okay, that's not bad. At that point, your goal is really just MV to the best of your ability.
Next, you have access to bands and or light dumbbells. Do you do your best to replicate your workouts and continue your diet, e.g. bulk and cut? So I would still say you can continue to bulk and cut. That's fine. But maintenance is also a consideration there. Do you replicate your workout? No. You follow modification of workout principles when training with dumbbells, for example. Very similar ones apply to bands. If you go on the RP website, renaissanceperiodization.com, in the blog, just a few months ago when COVID started, I put out I thought it was a fine blog post about how to train at home, modifications for at-home training with limited equipment. And it really is quite different. Like you're going to go way closer to failure. Your exercise selection is going to be different. Your frequency is going to be different. Your volume is going to be different. You're going to use some like rest pauses and all this other stuff. So it's going to be different. Don't just say, okay, I had barbell squats here and I'm doing dumbbell squats. That's not how it works, because if you can't do 3x10 dumbbell squats unless you have 180-pound dumbbells, like that. So give that article a read.
A couple aunts and uncles to hand them to you.
Exactly. So just give that some thought about. It's going to be different, but you can still probably manage for sure. And then number 3, you have access to a gym, but have to choose different exercises. For example, a home gym has a 45-degree hack squat and new gym has a standing hack squat variant. So this is actually a super easy answer. You pick the most analogous exercises that you can. Okay. And it's like, look, if it gets close, it's fine. Like James and I don't even think, we just think of like pressing move, curling move, rowing move. Like it's that simple. Okay. And if you can get more and more accommodating, like if you have an incline versus a flat variant, do the one that you were going to do. But if you just have one, it's okay. Right. And second of all, do a number of working sets that checklist the box of a really good stimulus. You got a robust pump. You got, some fatigue in the muscle, which will result in a performance loss after a number of sets, stuff like that, as far as volume, and make sure that you're in a similar rep range, not even remotely. It doesn't have to be like, okay, I got 13 reps here, but I got 15. Oh no. Like if it's between 10 and 20, you're doing just fine. And if you do one set that's hard and it's between 5 and 10 by accident, then just take some weight off and the next set still counts as a hard set, right? So you do that and make sure your proximity to failure is roughly where you were going to be for that week anyway, and you're fucking golden. I would say that if you did completely different pieces of equipment every single week, but progressed from roughly 3 RIR to 0 RIR through a mesocycle, and every time you trained to get a robust pump and a good stimulus and some fatigue, the difference between that and having the same equipment every time, for strength it's different, it's tough. For hypertrophy, the difference with that would be detectable only in the largest, longest studies where incredibly fine precision equipment was used. I mean, you can get incredible, because the thing is, a lot of IFBB pros literally train like that. They just do different shit, even at their own gym, every single workout, and they do just fine. The stimulus, and this is something actually that Brian Miner and Eric Helms are really good about saying, the stimulus presentation of overload it's just a very general concept. Train the muscle hard with similar movements and make sure to do enough sets to get the job done. And the details just don't matter a ton. It's nothing to worry about. And the reason I'm saying it's nothing to worry about, and James can share, I'm sure, more than a few client stories about this, people freak out about this a lot, and they never should. They get to a gym in a hotel in Mexico, and they're like, there's only a Smith machine. There's no actual free squat. What do I do? It's as if no one ever got a nasty leg workout at a Smith machine. James?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with everything you said. And I just love the example he gave in this one where he's like, okay, you have a 45-degree hack squat versus an upright hack squat. Like I wouldn't even, that wouldn't even register in my brain. I'd be like, sweet, hack squat, carry on.
Right.
Like that's
Yeah.
how minor that is. That's like a simple, another example would be like you were doing regular lateral raises and then you were doing thumbs down lateral raises. It's like, it's the same thing. It's just, you know what I mean? You don't have to think about it too hard. That might be like an your paralysis by analysis kind of thing. You're just overthinking it a little bit. So yeah, like Mike said earlier, it's really just kind of breaking it down. You can do it either by kind of like movement types, or you can do kind of like muscle group types. You know, so Mike and I tend to do movement types where it's like, okay, I need a curling movement, I need a pressing movement, I need a kind of a squatting, or sometimes you just say like a quad movement. Like you go to a hotel gym and maybe they don't have a Smith machine or a leg press or anything. They have like a knee extension machine, and maybe you do some sissy squats and some knee extensions. And you're like, okay, I got quads, check, good enough. Like that's good. That's the best I can do. More often than not, though, and this is something I was really adamant about in my article, which never got released, is just with a little bit of foresight and a little bit of planning. When you're on the road and you are going different places, whatever, there's almost always a place that you can drop into. And it just takes a little bit of effort on your part to look ahead of time. Dr. Mike's really good about this. I know he reaches out to people and just says, hey, I'm going to be in X, Y, or Z. Can we pop in for a couple, sessions? And almost always they'll say yes, or, pay a drop-in fee for whatever. Right now with COVID, it's kind of different because sometimes people are not doing, I've noticed people aren't doing the drop-in fees. They might ask you for like a month membership or something. But for the most part, pre-COVID, you can, mostly if you just do a little bit of detective work on your own, which is like, okay, Google search where you are, open maps, and then type gym near me, you'll almost always find something. Your boy has been to the Arctic Circle, not twice, but 3 times at this point, and I have found places to work out. You can do it. It's doable. Yeah, there's plenty. That's the thing. So there's always going to be, where there's a will, there's a way. Now, I'm not saying you should like spend your whole travel time doing your normal 5-6 day workouts at the gym. It's going to cost a lot of money. If you're doing drop-in fees, it's going to cost a lot of time and fuss, but you certainly can get like 2 to 3 days in and stay mostly on track with what you're doing. And that's great. And if you're somebody who's asking a complicated question like this on RP Plus or on YouTube, like it's probably worth the effort for you.
Boom. Our old pal, Mantas Piliputis. He says,
oh, yes.
Hey, docs, I just noticed that I have never thanked you for answering my questions. I truly appreciate your effort in answering my boring questions. They're great questions, Mantas. Why don't you ever say that? Thanks so much for asking them, and we're absolutely happy, and thank you for thanking us. Next question from him is, if muscle protein synthesis lasts shorter than soreness, which it usually does the application of supplemental recovery strategies reduce the potential of adaptation even after a few days after a training session if soreness has not yet dissipated? So the first thing I would say is I don't believe this has been studied directly. James, on pure theoretical grounds, what do you think?
I'm not sure, because a lot of the supplemental strategies have a direct timeline of use. And so what you might run into is you might be using them in such a way where the application of the strategy, like ice, for example, if you're doing it like days later, it's not going to have the effect that you want. There's actually a more
it doesn't reduce soreness
timeline
then, right? Is what you're saying?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I'm not sure if it even is having the positive effect, so it probably doesn't have the interference effects either at that point. Now, there are other ones like using a compression sleeve, for example, where you might run into that type of situation. And as Dr. Mike said, I don't think that's ever been looked at least in the context of comparing the intersection of soreness, protein synthesis, and the interference effects of using the supplemental strategies. From a theoretical standpoint, man, if that's like splitting such finite hairs, I don't think that it would make a measurable difference, because we're already talking about like something like a compression sleeve, for example. The effect sizes of using the compression sleeve is already so small. The timing relative to the soreness, God, I can't imagine there being a big effect there. Maybe there is an effect, but like what I'm saying is the effect size of using that method is already so small. The timing of the method, I'm not sure.
Yeah. James, that's a really good answer. The only thing I'll add is, in my personal experience, using the supplemental strategies like icing or heating or ibuprofen or compression, once you're peak sore, nothing contracts your time to no longer sore short of anabolic drugs, crap loads of sleep, and a ton of food, and generally just being relaxed. Nothing. Like, so you can take a bunch of Advil or ibuprofen after your peak sore, and then you'll feel less sore. And then the Advil will wear off, and you'll feel just as sore, same timeline as you were before. And you're like, fuck. Now, if you take Advil, this is very well established, if you take ibuprofen right after you train, before you get sore, you never actually get as sore as you ever would. Now, that also interferes, we know, with hypertrophy. So I suspect that some of these modalities don't actually interfere with hypertrophy if you take outside of the window of when the soreness is starting to come. But I also suspect that, like James said, they probably don't help either. Like, you go into an ice tank or an ice bath, 2 days after your quads hit peak soreness, you're coming out feeling better. An hour later, you're just as sore as you ever were. And you're like, okay, I didn't do anything, right? And the only question becomes is how you would use this in practice. If you have a hard squat session coming up in a couple hours, should you take ibuprofen to mitigate the soreness so that you can squat? I mean, that's bad on a couple of grounds. One, that's a really great way to get hurt because you can no longer perceive pain as well. Terrible idea. And also, that will leak into the post-workout window, and the intra-workout molecular signaling cascades are now occurring in the presence of ibuprofen, which is probably not great. So I would say, Mantas, no, it's actually not a concern, but also it's of no help. My hypothesis here in the situation.
Yeah, and just to kind of put the nail in the coffin on this one, if you are somebody who is primarily focused on hypertrophy and physique, the supplemental strategies are something you're going to use very sparingly anyway. If you are someone who is a sporting athlete who does hypertrophy training for their sport, it's something you can entertain maybe slightly more than the other physique-minded person, but still during your general preparatory periods, you want to minimize the use as much as possible anyway. So I would say you don't want to do anything with the supplemental strategies that are going to deliberately reduce soreness in some capacity. That's probably a bad strategy. But there are things like I would not, if you were like, man, my elbow's kind of wonky, and I've just noticed that, like, if I put the compression sleeve on there, it kind of makes it feel better over time. Like, I'd be like, yeah, just fucking put it on. I don't care. Who cares?
Yeah.
It's not going to make a hill of a beans difference.
Yep. All right. Perry Battles. Everyone's British today. Why not?
Oh, he's got his actual picture on there, and he's buff.
Yeah. Assuming that's his actual picture.
Skeptical Mike doesn't believe.
Looks like it is. Dude, YouTube people do shit all the time. I use the word people charitably when I talk about YouTubers. Just kidding, you guys.
Gotta be nice.
Doctors.
I received an email saying, be nice.
That's right. That's a good idea. Hello, doctors Mike and James. I have a technical question about functional overreaching. Now, if James and I could still get erect, this kind of shit, sports science gets us real erect. Let's say that I'm in week 4 of a 4-to-1 accumulation deal or paradigm, and I squat twice per week. If I fail to match reps on the first squat workout of that week, does that mean that I technically functionally overreached after the second squat session in week 3? Maybe. So the answer is maybe. If you actually cannot come back and do better than that performance in that second session, then yes. But if that second session goes better or at the level that you're normally used to performing, then that other session, the week 4 session 1 you're describing, was just a fluke bad performance, and we can't actually say that you were overreached. Like, you could just have underperformed for any number of reasons that have nothing to do with exceeding your recovery capacity. James, is that accurate?
Yeah, totally. I was just going to say, you could just be having a bad day. You could be having stressors. You could just, like, maybe you woke up in the middle of the night and had to go pee and weren't as rested, like whatever. It could be any number of things, especially that early on in the mesocycle. Like, assuming you're like an intermediate, you got a pretty good idea of where you should be and where you're going to go. You know what I mean? You don't see people who are cognizant of the volume landmarks really functionally overreaching in week 1, No,
this is week 3, James, week 3.
But he's asking about if he fails to match. Oh, wait, sorry. Okay, sorry. I misunderstood. My bad.
Week 3. So basically in week 4.
Oh, yeah, week 3. Okay.
Yeah, in week 4, session 1, he ate shit. Did week 3, session 2 overreach him? It could have.
Maybe.
But maybe it's a fluke performance. So let's see what else he says.
And again, like, it could be other things too. Sorry, just like the easiest one that we would normally point our finger at is like, did you just progress too high in your intensity?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's just too much. The reason I ask is that I've observed this phenomenon repeatedly in myself across a decently wide spectrum of squatting volumes. I progress fine during weeks 1 to 3, then fail to match reps sometimes during week 4. My question is, have I already gotten the benefit of functional overreaching at the end of week 3, and should I end the accumulation there and deload in week 4, anticipating missed reps due to repeated incidents of that phenomenon? Or does it make sense to have a whole week of training during which I miss reps in every session, because session 1 and 2 for body parts before I deload? I use squat as a simple example, but this often happens across various body parts. So what you need to do is one of two things. One, when you overreach, take a light session or a recovery session and then come back and hit it hard the next session. And or note that for next time and be a little bit easier in progressing volumes and loads to make sure it doesn't happen. Either way is cool, but what I would say is this. If you are squatting for 3 workouts in a row and you have a 4-to-1 paradigm for the rest of your body and it works great, and every time week 4 is the one that sucks, yeah, clearly then you are overreaching, right? And then the question is like, why are you still squatting at a 3-to-1 paradigm in a 4-to-1 structure? It fucks your whole program up. So maybe a suggestion we'd have is progress the same, but week 2, session 2, take a recovery session. That'll give you just enough extra boost to finish out those 4 weeks strong. Boom, problem solved. Because there's no guarantee that all of your muscles are going to reach MRV at the same time. There's just not. And then if you putz around and try to reduce them or increase them a little bit more, you could get away from optimality. So there may be a time for inserting a recovery session just so your squat can keep up with your other muscles. That's totally fine. Or you know that you're not going to reach the end until a certain point. And if it's within just whatever general soreness and fatigue that doesn't screw up your workouts a ton. Like you don't want to be like, okay, week 1, I don't want to overreach in week 4, so I'm going to do 1 set of everything. But clearly that's just a shitty workout, right? But if you can still have great workouts and maybe progress a little bit less rapidly, then just keep that in mind, because the idea is not just to progress every session, but the idea is to make sure that the entire accumulation phase sees mostly progress. I mean, you could fuck shit up and basically every week overreach on one session and then take the other one as recovery, but then you're training productively half as much as you otherwise would. James?
Yeah, that was really good. So I agree with everything Dr. Mike said, but I would like to just kind of funnel my opinion into maybe a couple of those select areas. So when I'm reading this, it says, I progress fine during weeks 1 to 3 and then fail to match reps sometime during week 4. It looks like that's in the context of his squat workouts, right? So if your other muscle groups aren't missing reps, and you are missing reps on your squat workouts specifically in week 4, then the answer is very clearly that you're just going too hard on the progressions between 1 and 3 on the squatting or the quads in general. That seems to me, that seems to be the glaring issue. Whereas if your other muscle groups all seem to be mostly fine, then you just need to tone down your progression. Deloading one muscle group like quads during week 3 and then continuing to train on week 4 with the other muscle groups just seems silly at that point. And if that's the case, then again, it kind of goes back to that previous point of, well, if everything else can keep being trained productively and just not quads, it just means that your quad progression is fucked up somewhere. So my strongest suggestion, and I agree with all the things that Mike said, if you were to ask me, I would narrow my focus into looking at my MEV to MAV progressions for quads and maybe just dialing back a little bit and see if that alleviates the problem. Because that to me is like the glaring issue, although it could be any of the other things that Dr. Mike mentioned.
I'm Maddie Mad Dog Forberg, and for those of you who don't know me, I am a strength coach and a 57-kilogram powerlifter on Team USA. I like that I can program into the RP Diet app what time I'll be training, and even if it's a light, heavy, moderate kind of session, and that will, differentiate the kind of macros that I'll need, and it can let me put in how long my training session is going to be. I use the RP Diet app during all seasons of powerlifting, whether I'm cutting weight, bulking up, or even right now, maintenance, keeping on the same weight that I am.
All right. Ty. T-Y.
Just time.
That's his debut album title. Just Ty.
There's an MMA fighter named Tai Tuivasa.
Oh, sweet. For some reason, a lot of debut albums have just the lamest fucking titles. Like, Mike Israetel, Pieces of Me. Like, shut the fuck up. Nobody wants to hear about you, motherfucker. Sing songs to entertain us, god damn it. You don't need to spill all your private
I like
Sharing,
when,
filming.
yeah, totally. I like when it's self-titled, where it's like the artist name, the album name is the same as the artist name, and the first track is the same as the artist and
Amazing.
album name. Like,
James
no,
Hoffman's
motherfuckers, you
album,
didn't even
James
try.
Hoffman, with hit single James Hoffman.
Featuring the hit single.
That's right.
Exactly.
And featuring vocal support by James Hoffman Sr., your dad. Like,
Oh, somebody, my dad and I have the same CPA, and he called today. He's like, "Hey, Jim." I was like, "Hey." He was like, "Is this Junior?" I was like, "Yep." He was like, "Oh, God damn it, I'm looking for your dad."
that sucks. All right.
Yeah, it happens. Oh well.
Ty asks, should someone be undertaking a bodybuilder type split if they don't have a foundation of strength? For example, if they can't bench 225 for 8 reps, is there even a point of them hitting chest once a week for 10 to 12 reps and doing isolation work? Or should they be focusing on lower strength oriented rep ranges, for example, 5 to 8, and increasing their compound lift frequency until they are quote unquote strong, at which point they can switch to a conventional bodybuilder routine with more isolation exercises? The reason I ask is that I've been training for several years with decent form, progressive overload, in addition to adequate rest and recovery nutrition. I've tried push-pull legs, upper-lower, and a lower frequency split, but I still don't look or feel strong. Strong is not a feeling, by the way. Strong is an objective measurement. We can get back to that in a sec. Recently, I've switched to 5 sets of 3 and hit the main compounds twice a week, sticking to a few select isolation moves, for example, bicep curls and rear delt flies.
Oh God, I hope he's not doing biceps and rear flies 5x3. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I hope not. I don't, probably not. Should I continue with this until I can hit decent strength numbers, or am I approaching this all wrong? Great channel, all the best. So the answer here is pretty sciencey, but bear with us. So the fundamental problem with the bodybuilder bro split is that its frequency is optimized for people that are fucking insanely massive, and any overloading workout that's 5 to 10 working sets or more requires like 5 days of recovery. Okay, when Marcus Rule or Ronnie Coleman, when they train chest, the shit gets so fucked up, they just can't train it for a long time after, right? However they might want to. So the thing is, Ty, you're not that jacked, neither are James and I. So for people, females are a classic example of this, that are smaller, they just tend to recover faster, which means if you're training very infrequently, like a super jacked dude who needs the time to recover, then you're training so infrequently that it really isn't optimizing. You know, you're just sitting on your ass a lot and not stimulating muscle growth and just kind of twiddling your thumbs and sometimes even losing a little bit of muscle between sessions and then regaining. So will you gain muscle and strength training each muscle group once a week with a bro split? You will, but not as fast as you could training it 2 to 4 times a week. So you should be able to train something 2 to 4 times a week. And if you're on the smaller side and the not so strong side, if recovery allows, basically if you can do between 3 and 10 work sets per muscle per session and fit in X number of sessions per week, no problem, sustainably, that's your X. Like I can do, you know, side delts for that many sets 4 or 5 times a week, no problem. So that's what I do. I can do quads for that many sets twice a week. So that's what I do, right? Big difference. So you should train every muscle sort of when it's recovered, training it between, you know, between 3 and 10 working sets per session on average. And then you'll find a natural place where you're best off. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is for beginners, there's some really, really good argument to stay in the 5 to 10 rep range so that they build technique as optimally as possible, especially technique under heavy loads, and then they can transfer it to having that excellent technique in more challenging rep ranges in which the technique is upheld, like 10 to 20 and 20 to 30. Because if you can't keep stable technique in the 5 to 10 rep range, you're sure as hell not ready to do way more reps, or your technique is going to break down into total shit. So you're probably over that. If I can sort of do a little like cold reading here, you're probably over that stage of your training in which you're really just learning the basic exercises. So that's no longer really going to apply to you, but sets of 5 to 10 are super great. What I will say is a hard no is there is no prerequisite strength you have to start benefiting from hypertrophy style training. Suboptimal hypertrophy style training, yes, you need to be strong enough for your muscles to need a week to recover. You may never get that strong. I'm not that strong. James isn't that strong. Most pro bodybuilders aren't that strong. You know, Andrei Milanichev, one of the greatest powerlifters of all time, you know, his deadlift, he would train hard every 2 or 3 weeks, okay? But not everyone deadlifts 400 kilos for reps, right? So you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. Train your muscles as often as they're recovered, are ready to go hard again. There's no cutoff to when you switch to a bro split. A bro split will work better and better and better for you as you get bigger and stronger because it will get closer to what you should be doing anyway. But I got a real good shortcut for you. just do what you're supposed to be anyway. Train your muscles when they recover.
Yeah, it really is that simple. That was a good answer. Yeah, I'd also like to second putting the kibosh on the like prerequisite strength idea. It really has nothing to do with anything in terms of physique. It's one of those things where it's you're almost voluntarily letting your ego hold you back because you're worried about your how strong you are, how strong you look to other people, all of the above. Man, you don't need any of that. You can just get in there, put in some good quality work, like Dr. Mike said, figure out kind of how frequently you can train each muscle group, and just adjust as you go. It doesn't matter if you can bench 225 or squat 315 or deadlift 405. None of that shit matters. All that matters is what you can do. Can you put in a reasonable relative effort? So when we say, you might have heard us say that earlier in today's episode, we said absolute intensity, relative intensity. Absolute intensity is what you're talking about, strength, right? How much weight is on the bar. As long as it's challenging for you, you're good. Then we look at relative intensity. Are you able to hit your kind of rep range goals, like in this case, 5 to 10, within like a reasonable RIR? If you can do those two things, like if you're using a weight that is challenging at 5 to 10 reps at 2 to 3 RIR, dude, nothing else matters. And at that point, you're already on your way. And as you get better, you can start looking at exercises and making better SFR choices. And you can start looking at your volume landmarks and thinking a little bit more about MEV, MAV, MRV, all those things. But you don't have to worry about the strength. You can just throw that out the window. And I know, like, we all come from sporting backgrounds to some degree. We all love, like one of the highlights of my holiday season was watching the World's Strongest Man Marathon on ESPN, right? We all love that shit. But at some point, you just got to let it go and just know that that's not you. That's not you. It's not me. It's not Dr. Mike. Like, it's okay. You can still be the best you with hypertrophy training and still be a jack. And and over time, you'll become stronger. You'll become a strong guy just from gaining muscle, and that's perfectly fine. So don't let the strength thing hold you back. It's one of those, oh my God, the reps in reserve guy got me so good this week. He had a fucking golden one. Mike, did you see the one with the
I didn't see
the
it
Shibas?
this week. No.
Oh, he had a fucking golden one. It was the, the meme where it's like the buff Shiba and then kind of like the feeble Shiba. So the buff Shiba was like bodybuilders in the 80s, and it was like deadlifts, like passes out and then keeps working out anyway. And it was like bodybuilders today, like, coach, I did RIR3 instead of, or I did RIR2 instead of RIR3, deload please. And I was like, oh my God, that's so true. That's one of these instances. Like, don't think about it. Just get in there, go, put in the work.
I'm trying to figure out where this thing came from, and I think I have a suspicion. I think a lot of people who were doing essentially just not frequent enough heavy training switched from bro splits to, starting strength or something like that. And now they're finally stimulatively training more frequently. And they also weren't progressively overloading on purpose before, and now they are. And they essentially, that's why they got better. And they told everyone else that you have to get stronger first, and then and then things work. The problem is that that example does happen. Those people like that. For every one of those, there's at least one bro in New Jersey that started training when he was 17 with a bro split, gained 40 pounds of muscle his first year, 20 pounds his second year, 15 pounds his third, and is now 27 years old and vying for the Mr. Olympia. And he didn't fucking know anything, and he's just fucking huge. So you got to remember that that story is a narrative that works. It's true, but it's not the only one that works. So,
and just to bolster your viewpoint here, before we even switched over to doing the YouTube, we had a bunch of regular RP Plus people like Khalid B and some other people who were always saying I want to be a jacked guy and I want to be strong. And there's plenty of good options out there. If that's something that tickles your fancy, Dr. Mike and I will tell you think about periodizing and maybe pick one and then pick another and then, sequence them in such a way. But you could also look at Chad's Juggernaut power building thing. Looks like it's doing really, really well. And people are getting really, really good results on that. And that's kind of a nice mix of the two where you're getting jacked and getting strong. Maybe not the most perfect for being as strong as possible or as jacked as possible, but some people want to be somewhere in the middle, and that might be something up your alley.
Nikola Kolev is the only way I know how to read that.
Oh, you skipped fake natty.
Fake natty is only 2 likes, JMO. He didn't make our cutoff.
I know.
Fake
I just
natty
like the
asked
name.
better questions. Sorry, your fellow YouTubers are not approving enough.
You have a good name. Just get a good question.
Name, better questions. Or worse questions, the ones that YouTubers like better. So Nikola has 2 questions. First one, in the context of muscle building, does it matter if a noticeable amount of calories for carbs are made up from sugar in the form of candy? Does sugar hinder the muscle building process in any way? No. Taking into account that we're eating the right amount of protein, if the answer is yes, is there any food that also does this? No, except for like alcohol. Definitely alcohol and maybe a high intake of saturated fat might have some muting effects on muscle growth. But if you're eating a normal amount of fats, and that is, if you're eating a normal amount of protein and carbs, then you can't possibly be eating enough fats to where that makes a huge difference. So it's not that I would worry about. But that's for muscle and performance. For health, you could eat less candy and eat more fruits and vegetables and be better.
Motherfucker, get that candy out of here. No, I'm just kidding. It's funny. But yeah, I mean, I would say, look, you don't want to have like a substantial percentage of your daily carbs coming from candy. Like, man, you know what? No, never mind. I'm going to say that one. But yeah, it's not a huge deal.
I love the ones you can't share. Second question. I have an issue with my lower back. Throughout my years of lifting, I had several instances where my lower back would snap during a squat or deadlift. Now, this doesn't happen often. Yeah.
What?
You know, like a Jewish injury, you know? Oh, my back.
This is again like when you say snap, that means something distinct to me and Mike. That means like, yeah, like,
but
like snap it to a Slim Jim. That's what I'm thinking.
Let's say it's more minor than that. Oh. So he goes, during a squat or deadlift, this would happen. Now, this doesn't happen often, so I still use both squats and deadlifts in my program because of their high raw stimulus. But I always have the thought on the back of my mind that I might snap again, that it might snap again, not I might snap again. And after a session where I have done one of these exercises, I feel like my back is stiff the next day. Sometimes my lower back is stiff even after I wake up. For a person with these issues, would you suggest to do if they wish to do these exercises? So first of all, is you don't have to do these exercises, but if, like you said, you wish to do them, I do have a couple of tips. One is always warm up thoroughly. People who have never been hurt can afford to warm up a little bit and tell themselves they're fine. And sometimes they are. You can no longer do that because you'll really hate yourself afterwards if you didn't warm up. Look, if you get hurt after warming up thoroughly, fucking shit happens. But if you get hurt after warming up a little bit and you're like, fuck, like it just sucks. So warm up thoroughly. First one. Second of all, don't go hard on those exercises too many weeks in a row or sequences in a row. So instead of squatting hard and heavy or deadlifting hard and heavy twice a week, do hard and heavy squats and deadlifts once a week, and then maybe some hack squats and some stiff leg deadlifts for the other workout to get a little variation going so the same microstructures aren't being irritated all the time. And lastly, when you progress in load and in reps and in sets, make sure to do it very gingerly and very carefully. Everything's okay. Keep going. If you feel like, ooh, I'm a little tense, I'm a little stiff, I don't think I'm recovered from last workout, take a recovery session instead of getting hurt. Come back strong the next time and slowly ease back in. I've done this with a bunch of lifts, and some of them, I don't even remember what I got hurt and when. That's how completely they've healed. Other ones I always have to kind of be a little bit on edge for, but I still get awesome productive training. So those are my thoughts. James, you got anything on top of that?
That was a really good answer. I just had like a thought vomit where normally when people say like, I'm kind of hesitant with some of these movements, what we usually would say is like, use a lighter loading range. Like instead of doing 5 to 10, do 10 to 20.
That's
unfortunately.
I missed that one. That's true.
Well, but in this context, with squats and like deadlifts, what are you going to do? Deadlifts for 20? Fuck that. No way. So in that case, you might leave a little bit more in the tank. And I'm not saying like,
sorry, real quick, but James, maybe instead of doing deadlifts for sets of 5 hard, you do them for sets of 10, and there's still a great stimulus, but it's not like the kind of load that will like really make or break.
Yeah, so for any of those things, like the load is what's really going to exacerbate your aside from user error in terms of not warming up and technique and things like that. The load is what's going to be exacerbating any existing injuries on there. So you would err on the side of either the lightest part of that range or maybe even going one range up. Now, in the case of squats and deadlifts, it gets hard to go up into that 10 to 20 range, but you might consider doing like up to 15 reps, which is tough, but doable. Like it's definitely vomit inducing, but doable. Or, keeping up to like 12, 11, 10 kind of reps. And that's a little bit easier for most people.
Beautiful. All right. Fionn Ruadh. Sweet fucking name. I have no idea how to say it. People talk about muscle imbalances. People talk about muscle imbalances as a source of injury. Is there any research on this? Yes, and almost all the research shows that they're not a predictor of injury, so unless they're clinical.
Yeah, outside of clinical boundaries, right? When you have massive asymmetries, and this is where you would put like if you had somebody standing on a force plate and they have like 20% of body weight is they have a 20% discrepancy of like their body weight on one leg, that might be an instance where they might be more at risk, right? But for most people, and there's a normal range of variation in terms of body positioning, joint positioning, muscle strength. All of those things have natural asymmetries, and within some of these normal boundaries, and don't quote me on the exact numbers, but it doesn't seem to matter outside of when you really deviate way outside of some of these ranges.
Yeah. So actually, he's asking about something a little bit different, which is interesting. The other kind of imbalanced, anterior-posterior antagonistic imbalance. How dangerous would it be for your intermediate power if you're never trained back or biceps and still do a normal amount of pressing? Would the shit fall apart? Well, almost all of the best Russian lifters train back very little and biceps never, and they're the fucking best in the world. So you don't actually have to train those muscles. Now, there's some good reason from a long-term perspective of body movement, joint integrity, and actually just strength to where you probably would want to train those at least a little bit. But, you know, the big tons and tons of back training, tons and tons of bicep training for powerlifting is optional at best and interferes with powerlifting training. You know, if you've ever seen any of Shako's programs, it's like squatting, pressing, deadlifting, squatting, 2 or 3 lat exercises, go home. And you're like, but where is all my bodybuilding work? Well, he couldn't give a flying fuck what you look like. And if you look at the Russian powerlifting team, you know, they look like muscular guys. They're not exactly like, they don't look like the Americans. The Americans are super jacked, except the Russians total at least as much as the Americans do, looking like much more regular people. Now, that might not be up your alley, but it's almost certainly never going to get you hurt. If you really think imbalances get you hurt, take a look at weightlifters and how fucking weak their upper bodies are compared to their lower bodies, and how super fucking weak their pulling musculature is. A lot of weightlifters, like if you're like, hey, bent over row, do pull-ups, do bicep curls, they're like, what the fuck? They suck at it. They never train it. Weightlifters never train bicep curls.
Minus Anthony Pompino with those fucking guns.
He's just, but the thing is, he came from a bodybuilding background too, right? So that's the thing is like, don't get caught up in that imbalanced stuff. It's almost never going to be a thing.
Yeah, and it's actually funny that you brought up the powerlifting thing because you can actually make a very strong cost-benefit analysis of how much for powerlifting and weightlifting are weight class sports. So the question is like, per your weight class, how much muscle mass do you want to be carrying in muscles that don't really have a direct impact on your ability to execute the movements that you're doing? So that might actually push you up into a weight class where you're less competitive. And that sounds silly, like, what are you talking about? But if you're carrying around a whole bunch of extra mass in your arms and your back is a fucking huge amount of area, you could actually be putting on a substantial amount of poundage there, which is not really contributing to your powerlifting or weightlifting to a huge degree and might take you out of being competitive somewhere else. So it sounds silly, but there is a very strong cost-benefit analysis that you could do there. You want enough of that to keep you healthy and able to continue training, but not so much that you're like seeing huge progression. So we're talking about kind of like maybe MEV at some times of the year and then MV the rest of the time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, great way to put it. And he says, epic bro bonus question. Seeing as gorillas for some reason choose not to lift, how jacked do you think they could get if they did? Surely gorillas aren't at their genetic potential. You know, so just on pure awful hypothesis, which is what we should just call this webinar, pure awful hypotheses with Mike and James. I think that if you did 2 things that I think it's only ethical to do with gorillas, we're not going to say 2, that's politically incorrect.
Does he mean like real gorillas or just like people from
real
New
gorillas.
Jersey?
You fucking asshole, you're a fucking gorilla. It's tough to say that and not be embarrassed. So actual gorillas, I think as a society, we owe gorillas at least 2 things. 1, teaching them to get into high volume resistance training. And 2, pumping up at least a few of them with the most moonshot levels of gear, like Apollo space program type level of gear. Like right now, the level of gear gorillas are taking can be described as 0, or like that stupid Radio Flyer movie where they try to get the thing to actually fly. I'm talking about Saturn V type of shit, like the Energia booster in Russia type of shit. I'm talking about all the lifting, all the gear. I don't care if the gorillas are mean. They're mean to begin with. More trend. Anyway. Yeah. Is that gorilla on trend or is it just a gorilla? Right? But if he's on trend, we can at least see a gorilla that's so muscular, it inconveniences the gorilla. And to actually answer your question, I think they would get way more jacked, and it would be out of context of anything you've ever seen in a human being. You think humans have an adaptation to lifting? Most primal fucking animals, all the pathways and shit are fucking more robust. We're nothing. Gorilla would, oh my God, J-Mo, the thing would probably weigh like 600 pounds. I would say no problem, completely lean would be totally accomplishment. The only people keeping us from this is ethics committees that run zoos and preserves. I think these people are not ethical. They're keeping gorillas from their natural artificial potential, and I think it's a travesty, James.
I could not think of one joke that I could say on this webinar, so I'm going to have to respectfully move on from the gorilla because I'm going to slip and make a bad move.
More New Jersey
Like literally,
jokes.
I was like,
Nope. Shut up, James. Yep.
I couldn't think of one okay one. That's how bad this
Luckily,
one was.
I thought of plenty.
No.
But seriously, folks, sign the petition. Let's
You
get
got
these
it.
zoos. Let's get these zoos to feed the gorillas tons of drugs and make them resistance train for our benefit. And really the gorillas' benefit. Because after a while, if they teach him sign language, he'd be like, do you like to be jacked? And he's going to be like, fuck yeah, bro. And you're like, we did it. We fucking did it. All right.
Bananas for days.
Yeah, you'd have to give him more protein. It'll be a whole thing. Bulgarian gorilla training. Jakub
And they
Kowalski.
extract protein out of plants better
Right?
than we do.
But they
Right?
eat
So
a
it's like-
lot of fucking plants, bro. They eat like 30 pounds of plants per day. So they extract marginally better, but they just make up for it in volume. Gorilla bodybuilding would be a trip because you're like, dude, you got tons of lean mass, but you got a big gut. Like, we got to have to sharpen that up, bro. You can't be walking around with that thing distended. You teach them how to do a
All right,
vacuum.
we got to
The whole
carb
thing
you
is-
up for peak week, but
Yeah,
you got to
what-
get rid of them bananas.
What a terrible, terrible feat of nothing. All right.
We got to shave
Jakub
you down.
Kowalski. Yeah, absolutely. They have to be shaved. I don't know. I'm volunteer for that job. You have to train them to shave them, right? Like, you have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's get out of this gorillas.
Okay.
It never ends.
Never ends. Like the hypertrophy of the gorilla would never end. Jakub Kowalski asks, how would you write a program? How would you program for someone who has a goal of doing 50 strict pull-ups without taking rests between reps? So this is quite a complex question.
rough.
It really depends on how far away they are from their goal. I'll give you the grand tour, and then James will sharpen it up. If you're really, really super far off, you want to establish the gnarliest pulling musculature you can. So your goal is just going to get fucking huge, using a lot of pull-ups, a lot of weighted pull-ups in the normal ranges, the 10 to 20 rep range. Like if you can, in the 10 to 20 rep range, do pull-ups with 50 pounds hanging, you're well on your way, right? And also you would train legs never, and train your pushing complex never, and just have the gnarliest back, biceps, and forearms you could ever fucking have. Okay, tons of rear delt work, tons of lat work, tons of rowing, tons of pulling, mostly vertical, etc. Once you were sufficiently large where your back was fucking huge, your lats were enormous, and you were doing sets of 20 with a 50-pound weight hanging, then the next phase of training would incrementally, and you would alternate these two phases, work on getting you into those higher rep ranges to work on cadence, the metabolic adaptations, and actually practice sets of 30, practice sets of 35, practice sets of 40, sometimes with a little bit of added weight, maybe sometimes with a little bit of weight reduced, like in an assisted pull-up where you do a set of 60, just to get the feel of that and get some of the metabolism. So you'd sort of approach it like up and down, up and down, up and down, and then eventually converge on reducing volume, peaking, and trying a set of 50. Tough. What I would say the better way to do all this is same structure, but try like 25 first. Whatever your best is, just try to move that up a little bit over time. Same approach, but like 50, it's difficult to answer this because, Jakub, we could give you a much better answer if you were like, my best is 47, but I haven't been able to break it. James and I could fucking break it down for you. In a couple of months, you'd almost certainly hit it. But if you're like at 10, motherfucker, you just need like a back that's 2 times the size. There's no other way to do it. James?
Yeah, that was a really good training periodization for that. The biggest deal breaker for me on this one is just literally a matter of strength to body weight ratio. It doesn't matter anything. Like if you are too heavy, you will never get to 50 reps. It's just one of those things where you have to maximize your vertical pulling musculature relative to your body weight. And that just means like you don't train anything else. You just let that all go to shit. And if you're somebody like me, like if I stopped lifting, I would still weigh 185 pounds. That's just never going to happen. Like it's just, you're too heavy, right? It doesn't matter. So you kind of like Mike said, if your best is like 25 and you are like 175 pounds, I might be like, dude, that's already like insane, right? From like when you look at average populations, like you would have to be like 105 pounds.
Almost
for me
nobody
to
can
seriously
do
be
50
like, oh yeah,
pull-ups.
50.
I don't know who can.
Exactly. So like, if I was to imagine someone who could do 50 pull-ups, they would be like a 105-pound male who did gymnastics his whole life and has a huge fucking Popeye forearms, huge biceps, and a lat spread that would put me to shame, which isn't really hard, but you know what I'm saying. So I'm just trying to say it in a nice way, like check
Where
your
are you?
expectations a little
Yeah.
bit. Where are you, right? Like if you can do 20 strict pull-ups, like no grip assist, no kip, chin above the bar, maybe even
You're
to
the fucking
chest,
man.
like you're the fucking, yeah, exactly. You're the man or the woman or whomever, whatever. You're already awesome. 50 is like when somebody says I can do 50 pull-ups, usually I'm like, sure, right, whatever. You used to bench 1,000 pounds in high school too, right? All that. I'd be very skeptical. So anyways, but Mike's answer on the periodization was really good. My suggestion would be you have to find your best strength to body weight ratio for that particular movement. Otherwise, it's all the training in the world's not going to make a difference. Like this is just a guess. Don't quote me on this, but like if you weigh over 160 pounds, I just don't, I can't imagine that happening unless you're like a huge outlier.
Agreed. Lastly, Ali Almomin asked a great question. Hi, docs. First, I truly appreciate your wonderful work, so thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Second, I've researched progressive overload to understand its underlying mechanism and proper application, and it seems that there are two similar but distinct definitions around the evidence-based community. One, the active definition, where the person intentionally makes every workout harder to generate a stimulus while staying within their capacity that will later result in adaptation. And two, the reactive definition, where the person observes an increase in their capacity / adaptation due to previous stimulus, which then requires them to make one workout harder in order to keep up with the said adaptation. Which is more accurate? I realize that in the long term, both end up with just making the workout harder over time, but in the short term, the two concepts will likely demand very different rates of difficulty increases. So I actually have a very good answer for you here.
That's a great question.
Yeah, we'll see if James has any critiques on my answer, or thinks it's stupid, or I'm stupid and I'm a bad person. It's usually the kind of stuff he says. So it's not just that the answer was wrong, it's I think you're morally inept and terrible.
Are going to hell.
You don't have to die, just leave everyone alone forever.
I don't want to kill her. I just don't want her to live anymore.
Exactly. Jeez.
Family Guy.
All right. So here's the deal. The reactive definition is the more technically correct one in a grand scale. There, overload is what is in the realm of challenging. And over time, if something dips out of that realm, then it's no longer challenging, and then you have to upregulate to keep going. That's answer one. So that's the bigger, more accurate definition. However, in the heat of the moment, microcycle to microcycle progressions, especially when you're very fatigued, especially when the lifts are very challenging, especially this real-world human psychological component towards the end of accumulation phase, for example, you may not think that you can do something, but if it's a planned increase, you will yourself to do it, and it turns out you could. You could be shitting away amazing workouts and potential progression by doing 3 RIR in 1 week, 2 RIR in another week. You say to yourself 1 RIR, but let's say you auto-regulate everything, so it doesn't matter to you how many reps you did last time. You're like, just 1 RIR. But then a rep reduction occurs because you just, hack squatting sucks and you don't want to do 20 reps and you feel like, okay, I hit 1 RIR at 18. But in reality, it was 3 RIR. And then the next workout is 5 RIR because you're really tired. To the muscle, it's 5 RIR, which means that last workout of the mesocycle, even though you feel tired and you feel like fatigue is accumulated, wasn't actually within the overload range on a technical definition. Now, the way James and I like to train is we start at a baseline when we're fresh of definitely 3 RIR at some decent amount of volume. And then we say we're going to move up 5 pounds or 2.5 pounds every time, or a rep every time. As long as we're able to get that performance, we try to beat it. We try to beat it by just a little. That way we know we never regressing. And psychologically, it's not if I feel like I hit a PR, I do. It psychologically is I must hit this PR. And if using everything I can, I still don't, then I'm for sure overreached. Then I deload, I wash out, I repeat, I come back. So in a short term, we really do advocate using that feed forward system of progression to make sure you're not fucking bullshitting yourself, right? And in the grand scheme, the auto-regulation will take care of everything to make sure that you're doing a good job. James?
Yeah, that was really good. And so Ali, this is kind of, a similar topic basically ties into this is the idea of having like pre-planned periodization strategies versus auto-regulated strategies. And ultimately, especially for physique training, auto-regulation is kind of the big bread and butter thing that we're doing, but it doesn't mean that we have to exclude pre-planned strategies either. And so if you actually read Recovering from Training, one of the things that we advocate for is having some pre-planned strategies, because you've trained for a little while. You have a reasonable expectation of how it's going to go because you've done it more than a few times. And then kind of having that either written out or mapped out in your mind or both, and then auto-regulating from there. And for the most part, once you've done this more than a few times, you find that your auto-regulation and pre-planned tend to meld pretty well together outside of a few deviations here or there. But the reason why you want to do that is because you have a built-in feedback and feed-forward mechanism with your training. The auto-regulation helps you with the feedback, meaning something comes up and you adjust to whatever comes up to get the best out of the situation. And you have a feed forward that says, something came up, I need to adjust my training next time because my pre-planned wasn't quite spot on and I need to make sure it's more spot on next time. So we say, like, kind of use both. You don't have to think of it so rigidly as like, okay, which is the most perfectly correct. It's like, well, they're both kind of correct in their own ways. Maybe one has a little bit more weight than the other, but it doesn't mean you have to exclude the other one. Use both. They're both very helpful for a variety of reasons.
I have a stupid analogy for how you can see this. Imagine the overload threshold from 3 RIR all the way to 0 RIR and from MEV all the way to MRV as walking from one facility on a base in Antarctica to another that's like 500 feet away. You got your snowshoes on and your fucking big coat. When you start walking at 3 RIR, 3 RIRs when you start walking, there's a bit of a storm, but you can see the other shed. Okay, it's got a light on it, you can see it, no problem. As you go from 3 RIR to 2 RIR 1 0, the shed almost completely disappears and the snow's like, whoa, right? So the question of what's pre-planned is, auto-regulated is, can you see the light? Walk to the light. Duh, right? Pre-planned is you got a fucking map that says walk this way exactly, okay? Because it gets real tough to see that fucking lighthouse, you might veer off course. Now the thing is, there's no trouble. The Antarctica analogy is a bit harsh because you'll fucking die in a snowbank if you veer off course. Nobody will find you.
Or a bear shows up.
Right. In Antarctica, they don't have they have bears. Anyway, if a bear shows up, you're really in deep shit because you're like, how the fuck did it get here?
I don't know.
Why is it trying to kill me? Bear, we're just fighting Antarctica together. We're on the same side of this. So, or you could like Luke Skywalker's ass fucking cut inside and just fucking go in the bear. That's it.
I thought they smelled bad on the outside.
Right. So, James, you're a real bantha fodder for that comment.
Oh, blah, 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 bantha fodder. Ho, 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 ho.
Java. So basically that's kind of the analogy, right? Like, yeah, no, you know where you're headed, but in the thick of things, you don't know if you're misstepping or not. So challenge yourself incrementally to make sure you're on that path, and then performance and overreaching will let you know when you've reached the top end, plain and simple.
Yeah, that was a good question. I like that one.
That's it. And I have to go to jiu-jitsu to get choked.
Oh, tonight we're doing jiu-jitsu.
Oh, tonight jiu-jitsu.
All right. Well, that was a fun one. It was fun for me. I hope you guys had fun. It was great having you guys with us. We enjoyed the questions. We had some spicy ones this week. A couple people are getting their name raised a couple times. So kudos to you guys. Really good questions. That's it for me. Dr. Mike, is there anything going on that people need to know about?
Nope. For the time being, we're just putting out tons of YouTube stuff and good things on the way. The hypertrophy book is getting wrapped up in editing, so it's going to be out in a few months. Get excited. It'll be real.
All right, folks, from me and my new friend, Pig, hope you have a great week. Enjoy, and we'll see you next time.